I remember the sound. Not the sirens, not the beeping machines, not even the frantic calls I made as my hands shook, but the silence that followed when I stepped into my home that day. A silence so wrong, so deafening, it punched a hole straight through my chest. That's when I knew something was off. I had only stepped out for an hour. Just 1 hour. I had to rush to the pharmacy to grab a replacement filter for my daughter's ventilator, the one that helps her breathe every night. My wife was working a double shift at the hospital, and I'd timed it perfectly. I kissed my daughter on the forehead, told her I'd be back soon. She blinked in acknowledgement, her version of okay, and I left. But I was wrong. As I pulled back into the driveway, I saw the first sign. The front door was slightly open. My stomach dropped. We always kept it locked. Always. Especially since she moved into the neighborhood. Karen. HOA president. Retired lawyer. Busybody. Control freak. Call her what you want. She earned every name. I burst into the house and instantly felt something was wrong. The lights were off. The house was still. Too still. That's when I heard it, a faint, clicking sound from my daughter's room. But not the hum I was used to, not the smooth whir of the life-saving machine that lulled us all to sleep every night with the assurance that she was safe. No, this was different. I ran toward her room and froze. The ventilator was unplugged. The cord dangled loosely near the socket like it had been ripped out. The backup battery had kicked in, but barely, the red light flashing wildly, blinking an SOS no one had noticed. My daughter's eyes were wide, panicked. Her chest struggled to rise. Her small hand weakly tried to gesture toward the wall. And on the windowsill, propped like a cruel joke, was a yellow HOA violation notice, taped neatly perfectly aligned, as if that was the priority. Noise disturbance violation. Inconsistent mechanical whirring after 10 p.m. Signed, Karen L., Moore President, Willowbrook HOA. I scrambled to replug the machine, hitting the restart switch, yelling out her name over and over. My fingers shook, my breath caught. She wasn't responding. I dialed 911 with one hand, the other trying to stabilize the mask on her face. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes, but 6 minutes in hell feel like 6 hours. She was taken to the hospital, barely stable. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because I refused to. I sat next to her, gripping her fingers, watching the steady beep on the monitor like it was a prayer. Then came the flashback I couldn't escape. Earlier that morning, 9:47 a.m. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock, that sharp, irritated judge, jury, executioner knock. I didn't even have to check the peephole. I already knew. Karen. I opened the door to find her standing with that same clipboard she carried like a badge of honor. Her lips were tight. Her eyes scanned past me into my living room, like she was hunting for violations. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice stiff like overstarched linen. I've come by regarding a noise issue that was reported by one of the other residents. Noise? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. Yes, a mechanical buzzing. Nightly. After 10 p.m., it's been disturbing the peaceful atmosphere our community strives to maintain. As per HOA regulations, all mechanical noise exceeding 40 decibels must be eliminated during quiet hours. I stared at her for a moment, stunned. Was she being serious? Karen, I said, that's my daughter's life support machine. She raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Yes, well, I'm not disputing the medical necessity. But you must understand, homeowners expect peace. I have 3 written complaints. We're not asking much, just that you find a quieter solution, or turn it off after hours. Turn it off? I repeated, feeling my blood pressure spike. She needs it to breathe. I'm simply enforcing the rules, she said, turning to leave, as is my duty. I didn't slam the door, though I wanted to. I didn't yell, though every part of me screamed inside. Instead, I closed the door gently and walked straight to my daughter's room just to make sure she was still okay. Still sleeping peacefully, the machine humming beside her. That was the last moment of peace we had, because hours later, someone entered my home. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. But my daughter's life support was deliberately unplugged and only one person had motive, audacity, and keys. You see, Karen was the one who handed us our welcome packet when we moved in. She insisted on installing the smart lock herself, saying it was part of a new HOA safety initiative. She even programmed the master override code for emergencies, she said. Funny how the only emergency she responded to was silence. I gave the police everything, the notice, the timeline, the fact that Karen had complained just hours before. They said they'd look into it. But Karen? She vanished, claimed she had left for the weekend, had receipts, an alibi, said maybe it was a malfunction. Sometimes wires just come loose, she shrugged when she finally returned days later. I know the truth. So does she. And so does my daughter, who no longer sleeps soundly at night, flinching at the sound of doors, opening, machines whirring, or the mere mention of rules. This wasn't just about HOA codes. It wasn't about peace or noise. It was about power, and someone who thought their authority gave them permission to play God. I walked into that house 15 minutes too late, and Karen was already gone. But I won't be. Before everything spiraled, we were just a quiet family, trying to live a quieter life. We had moved into Willowbrook Gardens 6 months before the incident. The name sounded peaceful, like something out of a postcard. Winding paths, identical picket fences, artificial lakes reflecting pastel sunsets. The kind of place people dream of retiring in. The kind of place people think is safe. For me, safety meant something different. My daughter, Emily, was born with a severe neurodegenerative disorder. She's nonverbal, wheelchair-bound, and relies on assistive breathing support at night and during high-risk episodes. But don't let that list fool you. Emily's spirit is stronger than most adults I've ever met. Her eyes hold so much expression, her smile can level an entire room. And when she laughs, really laughs, it makes all the sleepless nights worth it. She was 6 when we moved here, and this was supposed to be a fresh start. Our previous home, while spacious, was in a noisy urban area. Sirens kept her up at night. The landlord didn't believe in regular elevator repairs, and accessibility was always an issue. When Willowbrook opened up a modified unit with a ramp and soundproofing, it felt like a gift from God. And for a few weeks, it was. Neighbors brought over baked goods. A few introduced themselves warmly. One older couple even donated books to Emily's learning program. My wife, Sarah, and I had started to feel normal again. We began hosting tiny movie nights, just the 3 of us, curled up on our living room couch, the world shut out. That's when we met Karen. She wasn't hostile at first. No, her approach was clinical, a tight smile, a folder in hand, a rehearsed tone. She welcomed us with a printed 20-page handbook titled Willowbrook Guidelines for Harmonious Living. She made it clear she ran the HOA, not just administratively, but emotionally. People stepped aside when she walked down the sidewalk. Conversations paused. Her presence didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. Everything we do here, she said, is for the collective good. We pride ourselves on keeping this community pure and peaceful. I remember nodding politely. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. We both knew. That line always comes with strings attached. The first real red flag came just a few weeks in. It was 9:30 p.m. on a Sunday. Emily had just fallen asleep after a tough day of muscle spasms and coughing. Her ventilator was running, a low, rhythmic hum, barely audible unless you stood directly next to it. But it was enough for Karen to email us the next morning. Subject line, unexpected noise disturbance body. Please be advised that a consistent electrical vibration was detected late last night from your unit. Kindly review page 6, section 3C of your HOA packet, mechanical noise thresholds. We trust this was a one-time oversight. An oversight? We ignored it the first time, reassured ourselves it wasn't worth responding to, that maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But she didn't stop there. She began timing her walks to coincide with Emily's care schedule. We'd hear her footsteps just outside the bedroom window. Her presence wasn't casual. It was investigative. Once I opened the door and caught her crouched near our generator unit. She claimed she was checking for leaks. The complaints became weekly. One day, it was our trash cans being half an inch off the curb line. Another day, it was the wind chimes Sarah had hung, too reflective, possible distraction to drivers. But the real obsession always circled back to the ventilator. She wanted it gone. At one of the HOA meetings, which we were suddenly required to attend, she brought up a motion to limit medically unnecessary equipment that may emit low-frequency sound. When I raised my hand and asked who gets to decide what's unnecessary, she smiled and said, "The board will review each case on an individual basis." The board, Karen's friends, her chess pieces, her mirror. We began to feel surrounded, not by people, by watchers, by neighbors who stopped waving, by whispers, by measuring tapes mysteriously left near our ramp, as if someone was checking compliance. Sarah and I fought. We were scared, confused. Should we move again? Should we fight back? Should we stay quiet and hope she gets bored? But it wasn't about boredom. Karen didn't want us gone. She wanted us defeated. She wanted control, and we were the one family she couldn't predict. The one family that didn't fold when she showed up with a clipboard. And Emily was just collateral to her. This was no longer a neighborhood. It was her kingdom. And we were living on borrowed grace. It started with a knock. Not the kind of knock you expect from a neighbor, polite, uncertain, maybe even friendly. This one was sharp, methodical, like someone trying to break the door with authority. It was a message in itself. I'm not asking, I'm telling. Karen stood there again, clipboard in hand. Pen clicked and ready like a loaded weapon. "I've brought some notices," she said, stepping a little too close, her perfume strong, her posture stiff. She wore the HOA badge like it was a military decoration. Several residents have raised concerns. I didn't say anything, just stood there, holding the door halfway shut. Apparently, she continued, flipping her papers as if to validate the drama, there's been a recurring issue with what they describe as unnatural humming noises during nighttime hours. It's reportedly affecting sleep cycles. Sleep cycles, that's what she called it. I asked her calmly, "Karen, are you referring to my daughter's ventilator?" She gave the smallest of smirks. "I don't mention individuals. I simply enforce community policy. But if it were a ventilator, perhaps there's a way to minimize the disruption? Maybe place it further from the shared wall? Or consider alternate technology? We all make sacrifices for the greater good." I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull her inside and show her exactly what sacrifice looked like: the tangle of wires, the medical monitors, the sleepless nights, the emergency kit stocked in every corner. But I didn't. I closed the door quietly. She left a printed violation notice anyway. From there, it escalated quickly. The next week, I received an official written warning from the HOA board. A real document, watermarked and formatted like it came from a court. It stated that after multiple community observations, I was required to submit a written response explaining the purpose and duration of nonconforming mechanical noise. They wanted a written defense for why my daughter needed to breathe. Sarah was livid. She stormed into the next HOA meeting holding Emily's most recent prescription and slammed it on the table in front of everyone. "She has a degenerative disorder," she said, trembling. "We're not running a blender at midnight. We're trying to keep our daughter alive." Karen responded like ice. "And we're trying to keep our community livable." There was a pause in the room, the kind of silence that dares someone to object. No one did. The other board members kept their eyes glued to their coffee cups. Some even nodded along like this was reasonable, like Sarah was overreacting. That night, Sarah cried harder than I'd seen in years. And I realized something horrifying. This wasn't ignorance. This was targeting. We tried to adapt again. I added acoustic padding to the room. We spent nearly $900 on a quieter oxygen compressor. I bought additional generator housing to reduce vibration. But the notices kept coming. Once, we found a noise meter placed outside our bedroom window, one of those industrial decibel readers. It wasn't HOA issued. It was Karen's. She admitted it proudly at the next meeting. "I'm simply collecting data," she said with a smile. "Objective feedback is the cornerstone of fair policy." What policy? What kind of policy weaponizes silence? That's when we started getting the calls. A woman from a different unit, one with a daughter Emily's age, called us anonymously. Be careful, she whispered. Karen's been going around saying you're violating community health codes. That machines like that could be breeding mold. I was stunned. That same week, someone dropped a printed article in our mailbox titled Silent Killers, Hidden Mold and Breathing Devices in Homes. It was ridiculous, fear-mongering junk science. But it didn't matter. The message was clear. They were trying to turn the neighborhood against us, and it was working. People who used to wave now crossed the street. One neighbor moved their child out of the shared school carpool without explanation. A friend of Sarah's from the welcome committee stopped replying to texts. We were being isolated inch by inch. It didn't stop there. We came home one evening to find our generator shut off. There was no power outage, no storm, just a clean flip of the external breaker located outside the house behind the hedge. The only people who knew about it were the HOA and the electricians who installed it. When I reported it, Karen feigned sympathy. "Oh no," she said with a dramatic gasp. "Could it have been a child playing with switches? You should really secure that area better." We installed a lock the next day. That's when I knew. This was no longer just about sound or rules. It was psychological warfare. Slow, strategic, measured. Karen wasn't trying to make us leave. She was trying to make us break. And it almost worked. There was one night I sat beside Emily and considered pulling her machine out of the shared bedroom. Maybe move it to the far side of the house, even if it meant longer tubing. I stood there, staring at the outlet, fingers twitching. But then Emily opened her eyes and blinked twice. That was our code for "I'm okay." And in that moment, I remembered she's not the problem. Karen is. I wasn't going to move my daughter. I wasn't going to dim her life to make someone else feel more in control. But the damage was already spreading. Because Karen had one more move left. One that would nearly cost Emily her life. And she would make it without a trace of remorse. The next escalation came wrapped in an envelope, a formal cease and desist letter from the HOA board citing ongoing community disruption due to unauthorized mechanical modifications. Unauthorized? The ventilator had been installed by a licensed medical team, documented in our residency papers. But it didn't matter. Karen had now weaponized the HOA, like her personal law firm, and the rest of the board, spineless or complicit, followed her lead. We consulted a lawyer. He skimmed through the letter, raised an eyebrow, and sighed. "It's not enforceable," he said, "but it's designed to scare you. They're bluffing. This is pressure, not legal action." Pressure. That word hung in the air like a smoke alarm we couldn't shut off. Sarah and I sat on the couch that night, silent. Emily slept peacefully in the next room, her machine humming as always, low, steady, life-giving. But even that comfort began to feel like a countdown. Not if, but when. It was the next day that we noticed the security camera had been covered. A cheap plastic grocery bag tied tightly around the lens. It faced the side yard where our generator sat, the same generator Karen had already expressed concerns about. I reviewed the footage. Someone had approached just after midnight. No face, no clear features, just a figure with gloved hands. I called the police. When the officer arrived, he was polite, courteous even, but I saw it in his eyes, exhaustion. Not from the call itself, but from the fact that we were just another entry in a list of neighborhood disputes. That's what they called it, disputes, as if this was about fence lines or barking dogs. "This isn't criminal," the officer said, "but I'll file a report." I asked, "What if she unplugs the generator?" He hesitated. "Then call 911. I wanted to scream. "I am calling. I'm telling you. I'm warning you. Isn't that enough?" But warnings don't matter until tragedy strikes. 2 days later, I came home to find a bright orange notice pinned to our door. Notice of noncompliance, final warning. It stated that we had violated HOA Article 14B, use of equipment generating non-essential noise exceeding approved nighttime decibel levels. It said, we had 7 days to remedy the issue or face daily fines of $250, legal action, and potential removal of the equipment in accordance with neighborhood safety protocols. Safety protocols. They were threatening to remove Emily's ventilator. Sarah broke down when she read it. She crumpled the paper in her fists and dropped her knees. Not because of the fine, not because of the legal threat, but because it confirmed what we feared. This wasn't just passive aggression anymore. This was war. We brought the letter to a second attorney. He agreed the notice was a gross overreach, but warned us of the real danger. If the HOA could build enough community concern, they might push a public health complaint or even file an injunction under the guise of neighborhood safety. That night, I got a phone call from a blocked number. I picked up and heard a woman's voice. It was Karen. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice syrupy and cold, "you should consider the well-being of your child before this situation escalates further. I'm sure you wouldn't want this to become uncomfortable for her." There was a long pause. Was that a threat? I asked. "I'm simply saying," she said, "some places are better suited for people with complex needs. Maybe a rural area where the noise wouldn't be a problem, where your daughter could breathe freely without disrupting the entire neighborhood." Then she hung up. I reported the call. Nothing came of it. The next morning, our mailbox had been ripped off the post. The post itself had been loosened, as if someone tried to pull it from the ground. Again, no witnesses. Again, no footage, the camera hadn't been replaced. Again, no help. We tried to rally support from neighbors. A few were sympathetic. Most avoided us. One whispered, "We know it's wrong, but no one wants to get involved." Even Emily's therapist, who came weekly to work with her, was met with a parking violation notice taped to her windshield. Karen was now punishing the people around us, isolating us entirely. Then came the final straw, a petition, a real, signed document circulated among the homeowners, titled, "Motion to Review Medical Device Compliance with HOA Quiet Hour Ordinance." It had 18 signatures. 18 people who knew we had a medically vulnerable child. 18 people who chose to side with cruelty over compassion. And Karen was their ringleader. She handed me a copy at the next board meeting with the confidence of a woman who thought she had already won. "You should really start packing," she whispered. But I didn't flinch, because beneath all the rage, all the exhaustion, and all the fear, I had one thing Karen didn't: a daughter worth fighting for. What she didn't know was that I had already started documenting everything: the letters, the fines, the voicemail, the missing footage, the power cut, the covered camera. I was building a timeline, but I wasn't fast enough, because 5 days later she struck again. And this time, she didn't leave a notice. She just walked into our house, and she unplugged the one thing keeping my daughter alive. It was a Tuesday, a normal day, or at least what passed for normal in our lives. Emily had slept well the night before. Her breathing had been steady. Sarah had left early for a shift, and I stayed behind to handle Emily's morning routine: feeding, bathing, therapy stretches. By mid-afternoon, the house was quiet, peaceful. Emily was in her bed, her ventilator humming like always. I checked her vitals, adjusted the settings slightly, then told her I'd be gone for just 1 hour. The replacement filters for her machine were ready at the pharmacy, the kind we had to order in advance. I triple-checked the generator backup. I kissed her on the forehead. "I'll be right back," I whispered. She blinked twice, her way of saying okay. Then I left. When I returned, the front door was cracked open. I knew immediately something was wrong. Not a feeling, not a hunch, a certainty, the kind that grabs your spine and turns your blood cold. I dropped the bag. I ran inside. No sound, no whirring, no beep. The ventilator wasn't on. It wasn't humming. It was silent. Emily lay there, her eyes wide with terror, lips faintly blue, chest barely rising. She was trying to breathe. Trying. But the mask was loose. The power indicator on the machine was dark. Not blinking. Not red. Nothing. I lunged forward, checked the cord. It had been yanked out of the wall. The backup battery unit, usually flashing red if disconnected, had been disabled. The small switch at the back, one I never touched, had been manually flipped. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't an accident. Someone had done this, and they had done it with intent. I scrambled to reset the power, plugged it back in, pressed the restart button hard. The machine took a few seconds, eternal seconds, to cycle back on. When the airflow finally returned, I adjusted her mask and yelled her name. Her body shook, not from crying, from lack of oxygen. I called 911 with one hand, holding the mask to her face with the other. The operator's voice was calm, but I was shouting, desperate, incoherent. Just breathe, baby. Please, breathe. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. They told me later she was within minutes of going into full respiratory arrest. That night in the hospital was the longest of my life. Sarah arrived mid-shift, still in her scrubs, face pale. She broke down when she saw the monitor hooked to Emily's chest. And when I told her what I found, the unplugged machine, the flip backup switch, the open door, she didn't cry. She went silent, like something inside her shattered too deep to reach. We stayed at Emily's bedside until the next morning. When I went back home, I expected to find chaos. Police tape, neighbors, a shaken community, realizing what had just happened. Instead, I found a notice, pinned to our front door. Final fine issued, violation unresolved, $250. The line beneath it, scrawled in pen, refusal to comply will result in HOA intervention. Last chance. K. L. M. Karen. I walked inside, looked around. Everything else was untouched. No theft, no mess, nothing disturbed, except for Emily's ventilator. This wasn't just criminal, it was personal. And suddenly it all made sense. The notice, the timing, the covered camera, the petition, the night someone had tampered with the generator, the call she made where she said Emily didn't belong here. Karen didn't see Emily as a child. She saw her as a violation, an obstacle to order, a sound she couldn't control, a presence that didn't fit her perfect community. And she acted. She broke into her home, maybe using the override code she had insisted on installing when we moved in. She disabled Emily's machine, fully aware of what it did. She didn't just break a rule. She tried to take a life. I called the police again. This time they sent detectives. I gave them everything, the warning notices, the recorded voicemail, the prior threats, the notice taped to the door just hours after the incident, the lack of forced entry, the timing, the motive. They listened. But Karen? She disappeared. She wasn't home. She had left town the very day of the incident, conveniently with gas station receipts and a timestamp highway toll pass. Her lawyer claimed she had been planning the trip for weeks. She wasn't in the area, he said. She had nothing to do with this. No fingerprints. No direct evidence. No footage. The cameras still hadn't been fixed. And so, they couldn't arrest her. Not yet. But I knew. And she knew I knew. And that changed everything. The neighbors began whispering. People who once avoided us now lingered outside. Someone left flowers on our porch. One couple apologized, not with words, but with the look in their eyes when they dropped off a meal. The illusion was cracking. Karen had gone too far. But even in her absence, she left a message. That rules, her rules, mattered more than a child's breath. That order was worth more than life. That the power to control was more satisfying than the responsibility to protect. Emily eventually stabilized. Her body healed. But something in her changed. She wouldn't sleep without one of us by her side. She flinched when she heard footsteps outside her room. And every time the machine clicked on, her eyes darted to the wall, the outlet, just to make sure it stayed on. As for us, we were no longer afraid of Karen. We were angry, and we were ready to fight back. But first, we had to make the world see what HOA power in the wrong hands could do. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't neighborhood drama. This was attempted murder. And the war was far from over. The day after the incident, we filed a full police report, this time marked as a potential felony, attempted endangerment of a minor. The detectives were more serious now. They brought in a forensic team. They dusted the generator switch, took samples, photographed the power cord where it had been yanked. But it was too late. Karen had covered her tracks well. No fingerprints, no DNA. The override code used to unlock our door? Legally, it still belonged to the HOA master access system. And yes, she had emergency authorization as president. There was no security footage, no eyewitness, just us, and a near-dead child. We reached out to our lawyer again. This time, we weren't asking for advice. We were demanding action. He drafted a civil lawsuit, one that didn't rely on criminal charges, but focused on negligence, harassment, and emotional trauma. We included every documented warning, every violation notice, the voicemail, and even the final last chance note on our door. We served the HOA board first, and that's when things got ugly. The next board meeting wasn't held in the community clubhouse. It was moved to a private Zoom call. No open attendance, no transparency. Word spread that Karen had temporarily stepped down due to health reasons, but no one could reach her. No one had seen her. She had vanished, left the neighborhood entirely. The board sent us a response. The HOA is not liable for the independent actions of any single member. In other words, Karen was on her own, and they weren't touching this. But they had touched it, over and over again. They signed off on the letters, approved the fines, allowed the harassment. They were complicit, if not directly, then passively. And now they were trying to wash their hands of the entire mess. We went public. Sarah posted our story on a local parent support group. Within a day, it went viral. Within 3 news vans lined up outside the gates of Willowbrook Gardens. Microphones, reporters, national headlines. HOA president accused of shutting off disabled child's life support machine. Family claims harassment over noise violation turned into medical nightmare. Suddenly, the neighborhood that had once shunned us was on fire. Some people defended us. Some tried to distance themselves. And a sickening few, defended Karen. Rules are rules, one man muttered to a camera. It's a quiet community. You have to preserve the standard of living. That interview became a meme. The world saw what we had lived through, not just the act, but the attitude. We were invited to speak on 2 talk shows. I declined. Sarah went. She sat beneath the bright studio lights and told our story in one breathless, tear-filled, crystal-clear retelling. She didn't cry for pity. She spoke with the fire of a mother who had nearly buried her child because someone valued silence over humanity. She ended with a line that echoed across the country. If you can't tolerate the sound of a child staying alive, you don't deserve to lead anything. The clip got millions of views. Pressure mounted. The state health department launched an independent inquiry into HOA health policy violations. The county district attorney reopened the criminal side of the investigation, and the civil suit gained traction with support from disability rights organizations across the country. Suddenly, Karen was a national name, and not in a way she could have imagined. She released a statement through her lawyer. My client deeply regrets any misunderstanding. At no point did she intend to harm the child or interfere with medical equipment. Misunderstanding. That word burned in my brain. She knew exactly what she was doing. She planned it, timed it, removed backup power, left a note, and then fled. That's not misunderstanding. That's malice. Emily returned home 2 weeks later. Doctors said we were lucky permanent damage had been avoided, though her anxiety had spiked dramatically. We installed new locks, changed the code, bought an external battery backup independent of the grid, added full surround surveillance with night vision and cellular backups. We turned our home into a fortress because even though Karen was gone, trust doesn't come back so easily. One afternoon, a woman knocked gently on our door. She was from 3 streets down, a quiet older lady who had never said much before. She brought soup. I voted on that petition, she admitted, eyes cast low. I signed it. I thought it was just about regulations. I didn't think she didn't finish. I didn't make her feel worse. I just thanked her, not for the soup, for showing up. Sometimes showing up is enough. In the following months, 5 other families filed complaints against the HOA, not as extreme as ours, but pointing to a pattern of abuse. Petit finis. retaliation, intimidation. Karen's grip had gone deeper than anyone realized. Eventually, the HOA board was dissolved. A state-appointed mediator took over its responsibilities while investigations continued. Karen never returned to the neighborhood. Her house was sold anonymously. No forwarding address. But the damage she left behind? That stayed. Emily now sleeps with a small nightlight shaped like a butterfly. She named it Hope. She blinks at it twice every night before sleep. She's healing. Slowly. And so are we. But we never did get an apology. Not a single word. Just silence. And maybe that's the loudest thing of all. It took nearly 9 months before the justice system finally caught up. 9 months of hearings, depositions, media interviews, psychological evaluations, and community testimonies. Karen stayed silent through it all. She never showed up to court in person. Only her lawyer did, armed with polished statements and deflection strategies. But no legal polish could erase what she'd done. The civil suit ended first. The judge ruled in our favor. Karen was found personally liable for harassment, negligent endangerment, emotional distress interference with medical treatment. The judgment? $680,000 in damages, including a provision for Emily's long-term care, equipment upgrades, and trauma therapy. Karen's legal team tried to appeal, said the amount was excessive. The appellate court disagreed. But it wasn't about the money. It was about something deeper. Accountability. And slowly we got it. The state medical board launched a parallel investigation, this time into Karen's misuse of legal language and interference with licensed care. Her law credentials, long retired, were officially revoked. She was barred from ever serving in a governance or advisory role in any community organization again. But the most emotional moment came 6 months later when the county criminal court issued a ruling. After extensive review of evidence, expert testimony, and community history, the judge stated, the defendant's behavior, while meticulously hidden, reflects a calculated and reckless disregard for human life. Though the criminal standard for attempted murder was not met due to lack of direct physical evidence, the court finds sufficient grounds for a charge of reckless endangerment of a minor with intent to intimidate. Karen took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 14 months in a minimum security correctional facility and 3 years probation, including mandatory community service in a disability resource center. Some people said it was too light. Maybe it was. But knowing she'd never again be allowed near a position of power, knowing that her name would be forever linked to what she did to Emily, that was justice enough for us. As the dust settled, our world changed in ways we didn't expect. Emily began speaking a few words again. Her therapist said it was rare, but not impossible. Trauma has strange ways of unlocking parts of the brain that have been silent for years. One night, as I tucked her in and adjusted her nightlight, she whispered her first word. Stay. I held her hand and cried like I hadn't cried since the day she was born. We became advocates, not out of choice, but because silence is what nearly killed our daughter. We joined disability rights groups. We spoke at 2 community housing reform forums. We began helping other families facing HOA harassment over medical equipment. One woman, a mother of a teenage boy with epilepsy, told us her son's seizure monitor was nearly banned by her building's board for making too much clicking noise. Another man said his father's oxygen compressor was deemed a nuisance. This wasn't just our story. It was happening everywhere. People hiding behind rules to justify cruelty. Boards forgetting that homes are for people, not for perfection. Communities that valued uniformity more than humanity. So we fought, and we still do. We've helped push legislation in our state for what's now called the Emily Act, a law that prohibits HOAs from enforcing penalties on any life-sustaining medical device, regardless of sound level, if medically prescribed and documented. It's a small step, but it's hers. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and check the monitor. Not because it's malfunctioning, but because trauma doesn't follow logic. It follows patterns, shadows, footsteps that don't exist anymore. But each time, I see that little butterfly light glowing softly near her pillow. Hope. Not the decorative kind, the hard kind, the kind that fights. And Karen, last I heard, she moved to another state. No HOA, no board, just her, alone in a small apartment paid for with what remained of her retirement fund. She refused every interview, every camera. The woman who once controlled an entire neighborhood now lives in silence. But this time, it's not peace, it's consequence. And maybe that's the loudest thing she's ever heard. Sometimes people ask me, do you hate her? I used to. But hate is heavy. It slows you down. It keeps you locked in the past, a past we've fought so hard to escape. Now? Now I feel something different. I feel conviction. That no one should ever fear keeping their child alive. That no mother should ever have to defend her daughter's right to breathe. That no rule should ever stand taller than a heartbeat. Because the moment we allow rules to matter more than people, we all lose. If you've stayed with us until now, thank you. You didn't just hear our story, you witnessed a truth many families live in silence. A truth where policy replaces compassion. Where a rulebook has more weight than a child's breath. Where silence isn't peace, it's power abused. But it doesn't have to stay that way. If you live in a neighborhood or serve on a board, or even just walk past someone's window, remember, you never know what that sound means. That low hum? That beep? That generator noise? It might be the only thing keeping someone alive. And if you're a parent or caregiver and you've ever been made to feel like your child is an inconvenience, I want you to hear me now. You are not alone. This is not just our story. It's a call, a warning, and a beginning. So, if this moved you, speak up. Share this story. Start the conversation. Ask your HOA what protections exist for medical needs. Push for change. And if you've ever been Karen or stood beside someone like her, it's not too late. You can still choose empathy over enforcement. We did everything we could to save our daughter's life. Now, maybe you can help save someone else's. Comment below if you've ever experienced HOA harassment or seen someone misuse power. Shield support disability rights organizations in your area. Loudspeaker, and don't forget to subscribe, because we tell real stories that need to be heard. Sometimes the smallest sound is the one that saves a life.